Hi all, I have a fascinating game to show you from the Isle of Man Open tournament, which Magnus Carlsen had a fantastic event and he won it eventually. So you might be able to guess the result of this game in advance. His opponent here was Pavel Eljanov, who is a very, very strong grandmaster. He plays knight f3, the Reti opening, which is hypermodern in style in that it does not immediately occupy the centre. And Magnus replies in hypermodern style, b6. So he's also interested in exerting influence on the centre and not directly occupying it for a moment. Now white does play e4. So we have an unusual kind of Owen's defence, I believe, with b6. So bishop b7, knight c3, e6, d4, bishop b4, which means now with the knight pin, bishop takes e4 is threatened. White protects the e-pawn and more pressure is added, and white protects again with queen e2. This is the most popular method, not for example e5. I think e5, black just plays potentially knight e4, and that's a nuisance for white. White doesn't want to give up, for example, the dark square bishop. Black could then take and then maybe even drop back here and say, well, I've got the two bishops now. So usually, yeah, queen e2 is played. We have d5, again putting pressure on e4. Now white takes on d5 here. As I mentioned before, e5, knight e4, we run into the same issue. With the pressure on c3, white doesn't really want to give up the dark square bishop. This would just, again, it's the same principle, would just be very comfortable. And black's doing fine. So we have e takes d5, and now queen takes d5, white castles, and now knight takes queen is threatened, and Magnus doubles those pawns, giving white what could potentially be a very dangerous bishop pair and a dark square bishop without a counterpart. But it swings and roundabouts here, the structure versus the two bishops. Knight b d7 is played. So keeping an eye on e5 and not casting for the moment. c4, queen goes to h5, and again structural damage is on the cards potentially with bishop takes f3. Bishop f4, just ignoring that and hitting this pawn. That pawn is protected. a4, and if Magnus wanted to, he could play bishop takes f3, but maybe it's could be a step too far. He played a5 on bishop takes f3, giving white the full bishop pair. This position with structural damage on both sides is technically about equal. It's real swings and roundabouts territory here, structure versus the bishop pair. So we have a5 for the moment. Rook b1. Now black castles. Rook b5 hitting the queen. c5. D takes c5, and you'll note that white's structure here does seem quite vulnerable. Rook takes c5, but you might also consider that any rook takes b5 here helps the structure a little bit, surely. Bishop d6 is played. Rook takes b5, and now it's not possible to play bishop takes f8 because black would win with bishop takes f3. Be winning lots of material here with the check, and then taking the bishop. Well, enough material, a piece up. So yeah, we have c takes b5. Maybe technically better would have been a takes b5. It seems a little bit counterintuitive to do this, giving black an outside pass pawn, but this might have been the safer approach because here this a pawn is left on board and it might be quite vulnerable. We have rook c8. So white's pawns, although, yeah, he hasn't given black this outside pawn, they seem a little bit vulnerable here. c4, and this square in particular is very nice, the c5 square for black. Knight c5. And with this pressure on d3, bishop takes f3 is more strongly on the cards here. The bishop drops back. We have knight c e4 hitting this bishop. The bishop drops to f4, but now knight c3, and you can see that the queen and the a pawn have been forked. Queen d3. Now queen g4 hitting the bishop on f4, and behind that is this c4 pawn, which is vulnerable. And white really can't do too much about this. He plays bishop e5 and he drops quite an important queenside pawn. You'll know a4 is also very vulnerable. The queens do come off here. Any queen move, we've got all sorts of things, primarily knight e2 checks brings to mind to win the bishop on c2. So the queens come off, bishop d3, and here the bishop is hitting that knight, so this pawn can't be nabbed just yet with the rook. The rook just drops back, so this pawn is attacked, it's protected. Now knight f d5, knight d2, f6, bishop d6, knight b4 hitting this bishop, and welcoming any change in structure like this, because then the a file will be good for black and there'll be a passed pawn there. Bishop c4 hitting e6, and that's nicely protected with bishop d5. Bishop drops back, and now knight ba2, which spells another pawn is about to drop off with knight takes a4, and the game actually ended here. An example continuation. White resigned. He had far less time than Magnus. If bishop f4, black goes 2 pawns up, and really, yeah, after say king f7, this knight's protecting b6 as well. Black's just got a massive advantage. He didn't really fancy his chances there against Magnus. So, yep, knight a2, knight ba2, and leaving this knight to take that, white resigns. That's the final position. So a very, very interesting hypermodern treatment by Magnus. He did seem more hypermodern than usual in this tournament overall, and that's kind of fascinating, that kind of provocative strategy, letting the opponent occupy the centre to try and undermine it later. And it turned out to be white's queenside pawns which were very, very weak. Perhaps the key mistake was not allowing black that past a pawn. Maybe that was the lesser evil choice. It seems his c4 was quite vulnerable, and then a4 later. Okay, I hope you got something from it. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much.